Color printing. A color printing is the reproduction of an image or text in color. Any natural scene, a color photograph, can be optically and physiologically dissected into three primary colors: red, green, and blue, roughly equal amounts of which give rise to the perception of white, and different proportions of which give rise to the visual sensations of all other colors. The additive combination of any two primary colors in roughly equal proportion gives rise to the perception of a secondary color. For example, red and green yields yellow, red and blue yields magenta, and green and blue yield cyan. Only yellow is counterintuitive. Yellow, cyan and magenta are merely the basic secondary colors. Unequal mixtures of the primaries give rise to perception of many other colors, all of which may be considered tertiary. Modern techniques. While there are many techniques for reproducing images in color, specific graphic processes and industrial equipment are used for mass reproduction of color images on paper. In this sense, color printing involves reproduction techniques suited for printing presses capable of thousands or millions of impressions for publishing, newspapers and magazines, brochures, cards, posters and similar mass-market items. In this type of industrial or commercial printing, the technique used to print full-color images, such as color photographs, is referred to as four-color process or merely process printing. Four inks are used, three secondary colors plus black. These ink colors are cyan, magenta, yellow and ki, abbreviated as CMYK. Cyan can be thought of as minus red, magenta as minus green, and yellow as minus blue. These inks are semi-transparent or translucent, where two such inks overlap on the paper due to sequential printing impressions, a primary color is perceived. For example, yellow overprinted by magenta yields red, where all three inks may overlap. Almost all incident light is absorbed or subtracted, yielding near black. But in practical terms it is better and cheaper to use a separate black ink instead of combining three colored inks. The secondary or subtractive colors cyan, magenta and yellow may be considered primary by printers and watercolorists. Two graphic techniques are required to prepare images for four-color printing. In the pre-press stage, original images are translated into forms that can be used on a printing press through color separation and screening or halftoning. These steps make possible the creation of printing plates that can transfer color impressions to paper on printing presses based on the principles of lithography. An emerging method of full-color printing is six-color process printing, which adds orange and green to the traditional CMYK inks for a larger and more vibrant gamut or color range. However, such alternate color systems still rely on color separation, halftoning, and lithography to produce printed images. Color printing can also involve as few as one color ink, or multiple color inks which are not the primary colors. Using a limited number of color inks, or specific color inks in addition to the primary colors, is referred to as spot color printing. Generally, spot color inks are specific formulations that are designed to print alone, rather than to blend with other inks on the paper to produce various hues and shades. The range of available spot color inks, much like paint, is nearly unlimited, and much more varied than the colors that can be produced by four-color process printing. Spot color inks range from subtle pastels to intense fluorescence to reflective metallics. Color printing involves a series of steps, or transformations, to generate a quality color reproduction. The following sections focus on the steps used when reproducing a color image in CMYK printing, along with some historical perspective. History of color printing. Woodblock printing on textiles preceded printing on paper in both Asia and Europe. and the use of different blocks to produce patterns in color was common. The earliest way of adding color to items printed on paper was by hand coloring, and this was widely used for printed images in both Europe and Asia. Chinese woodcuts have this from at least the 13th century, and European ones from very shortly after their introduction in the 15th century, where it continued to be practiced, sometimes at a very skilled level, until the 19th century. Elements of the official British Ordnance Survey maps were hand-colored by boys until 1875. Early European printed books often left spaces for initials, rubrics and other elements to be added by hand, just as they had been in manuscripts, and a few early printed books had elaborate borders and miniatures added. However, this became much rarer after about 1500. China. Michael Sullivan writes that the earliest color printing known in China, and indeed in the whole world, is a two-color frontispiece to a Buddhist sutra scroll, dated 1346. Color prints were also used later in the Ming dynasty. In Chinese woodblock printing, early color woodcuts mostly occur in luxury books about art, especially the more prestigious medium of painting. The first known example is a book on ink cakes printed in 1606, and color technique reached its height in books on painting published in the 17th century. Notable examples are Hu Zhangyun's treatise on the paintings and writings of the Ten Bamboo Studio of 1633, and the Manual of the Mustard Seed Garden published in 1679 and 1701, and printed in 5 colors. Europe. Most early methods of color printing involved several prints, one for each color, although there were various ways of printing two colors together if they were separate. Liturgical and many other kinds of books required rubrics, normally printed in red. These were long done by a separate print run with a red form for each page. Other methods were used for single-leaf prints. The chiaroscuro woodcut was a European method developed in the early 16th century, where to a normal woodcut block with a linear image, one or more colored tone blocks printed in different colors would be added. This was the method developed in Germany. In Italy, only tone blocks were often used, to create an effect more like a wash drawing. Jacob Christophe Leblond developed a method using 3 intaglio plates, usually in mezzo tint. These were overprinted to achieve a wide range of colors. Japan. In Japan, color woodcuts were used for both sheet prints and book illustrations, though these techniques are better known within the history of prints. The full-color technique, called nishiki-e in its fully developed form, spread rapidly, and was used widely for sheet prints from the 1760s on. Text was nearly always monochrome, and many books continued to be published with monochrome illustrations sumizuri-e. But the growth of the popularity of ukiyo-e brought with it demand for ever-increasing numbers of colors and complexity of techniques. By the 19th century, most artists designed prints that would be published in color. Major stages of this development were sumizuri-e, monochrome printing using only black ink; tan-e, monochrome sumizuri-e, prints with hand coloring, distinguished by use of orange highlights using a red pigment called tan; ben-e, monochrome sumizuri-e, prints with hand coloring, distinguished by use of red ink details or highlights. Should not be confused with benazuri-e, below. Urushi-e, a method in which glue was used to thicken the ink, emboldening the image. Gold, mica and other substances were often used to enhance the image further. This technique was often used in combination with hand coloring. Urushi-e can also refer to paintings using lacquer instead of paint. Lacquer was very rarely, if ever, used on prints. Benazuri-e, images printed in 2 or 3 colors, usually containing red and green pigments, as well as black ink. This printing technique should not be confused with Beni-e above. Both Beni-e and Benazuri-e, also named for the predominant reddish colorants derived from dyes of the safflower plant. Nishiki-e, a method in which multiple blocks were used for separate portions of the image, allowing a number of colors to be utilized to achieve incredibly complex and detailed images. A separate block would be carved to apply only to the portion of the image designated for a single color. Registration marks called kento were used to ensure correspondence between the application of each block. Further developments followed from refinements of technique and trends in taste. For instance, Izuri-e, Murasaki-e, and other styles in which a single color would be used in addition to or instead of black ink. These are specialty techniques that grew in popularity in the 19th century, though a few examples can be seen earlier. 19th century. In the 19th century, a number of different methods of color printing, using woodcut and other methods, were developed in Europe, which for the first time achieved widespread commercial success, so that by the later decades the average home might contain many examples, both hanging as prints and as book illustrations. George Baxter patented in 1835 a method using an intaglio line plate, printed in black or a dark color, and then overprinted with up to 20 different colors from wood blocks. Edmund Evans used relief and wood throughout with up to 11 different colors, and latterly specialized in illustrations for children's books, using fewer blocks but overprinting non-solid areas of color to achieve blended colors. Artists such as Randolph Caldecott, Walter Crane and Kate Greenaway were influenced by the Japanese prints now available and fashionable in Europe to create a suitable style, with flat areas of color. Chromolithography was another process, which by the end of the 19th century had become dominant, although this used multiple prints with a stone for each color. Mechanical color separation, initially using photographs of the image taken with 3 different color filters, reduced the number of prints needed to 3. Zincography, with zinc plates, later replaced lithographic stones, and remained the most common method of color printing until the 1930s. Modern process. Color separation process. Typically, color separation is the responsibility of the color separator. This includes cleaning up the file to make it print ready and creating a proof for the pre-press approval process. The process of color separation starts by separating the original artwork into red, green, and blue components. Before digital imaging was developed, the traditional method of doing this was to photograph the image 3 times, using a filter for each color. However, this is achieved. The desired result is 3 grayscale images, which represent the red, green, and blue components of the original image. The next step is to invert each of these separations. When a negative image of the red component is produced, the resulting image represents the cyan component of the image. Likewise, negatives are produced of the green and blue components to produce magenta and yellow separations, respectively. This is done because cyan, magenta, and yellow are subtractive primaries, which each represent 2 of the 3 additive primaries after one additive primary has been subtracted from. White light, cyan, magenta, and yellow are the 3 basic colors used for color reproduction. When these 3 colors are variously used in printing, the result should be a reasonable reproduction of the original, but in practice this is not the case. Due to limitations in the inks, the darker colors are dirty and muddy. To resolve this, a black separation is also created, which improves the shadow and contrast of the image. Numerous techniques exist to derive this black separation from the original image. These include gray component replacement, undercolor removal, and undercolor addition. This printing technique is referred to as CMYK. Today's digital printing methods do not have the restriction of a single color space that traditional CMYK processes do. Many presses can print from files that were ripped with images using either RGB or CMYK modes. The color reproduction abilities of a particular color space can vary. The process of obtaining accurate colors within a color model is called color matching. Screening inks used in color printing presses are semi-transparent and can be printed on top of each other to produce different hues. For example, green results from printing yellow and cyan inks on top of each other. However, a printing press cannot vary the amount of ink applied to particular picture areas except through screening, a process that represents lighter shades as tiny dots rather than solid areas of ink. This is analogous to mixing white paint into a color to lighten it, except the white is the paper itself. In process color printing, the screened image or halftone for each ink color is printed in succession. The screen grids are set at different angles, and the dots therefore create tiny rosettes which, through a kind of optical illusion, appear to form a continuous tone image. You can view the halftoning, which enables printed images, by examining a printed picture under magnification. Traditionally, halftone screens were generated by ink lines on two sheets of glass that were cemented together at right angles. Each of the color separation films were then exposed through these screens. The resulting high-contrast image, once processed, had dots of varying diameter depending on the amount of exposure that area received, which was modulated by the grayscale separation film image. The glass screens were made obsolete by high-contrast films where the halftone dots were exposed with the separation film. This in turn was replaced by a process where the halftones are electronically generated directly on the film with a laser. Most recently, computer-to-plate technology has allowed printers to bypass the film portion of the process entirely. CTP images the dots directly on the printing plate with a laser, saving money and eliminating the film step. The amount of generation loss in printing a lithographic negative onto a lithographic plate, unless the processing procedures are completely ignored, is almost completely negligible, as there are no losses of dynamic range, no density gradations, nor are there any colored dyes, or large silver grains to contend with in an ultra-slow rapid access negative. Screens with a frequency of 60 to 120 lines per inch reproduce color photographs in newspapers. The coarser the screen, the lower the quality of the printed image. Highly absorbent newsprint requires a lower screen frequency than less absorbent coated paper stock used in magazines and books, where screen frequencies of 133 to 200 LPR and higher are used. The measure of how much an ink dot spreads and becomes larger on paper is called dot gain. This phenomenon must be accounted for in photographic or digital preparation of screened images. Dot gain is higher on more absorbent, uncoated paper stock such as newsprint.